Lots of makers like the idea of creating a junk journal, but don't necessarily have a reason why they want to create one. I'm going to cover 8 reasons to love junk journals to highlight how special these books are. Hello, I'm Marguerite Miller, and today I'm talking about junk journals and what makes them special. I'm going to be covering 8 characteristics that you may or may not have come to appreciate about them. Maybe you're familiar with all of them, but if you haven't considered some of these points, then perhaps it'll give you some ideas or some renewed interest in working on junk journals. First, let's quickly cover what exactly is a junk journal. A junk journal is a handmade book of recycled and found materials and ephemera. The pages can be used to write, draw, paint, or record memories, thoughts, ideas, and inspiration. Materials for a junk journal are usually found or recycled items, so this brings us to the first thing to love about junk journals. Junk journals are truly unique pieces of book art. Since there's such a huge variety in all the elements that are used to create a junk journal, no 2 books are alike. Many of us have a range of art supplies, papers, and personal ephemera. Even if we have similar products, what we create are going to be uniquely different. Speaking of art supplies, here's the second thing to love about junk journals. Junk journals typically require lots of materials, which means that you can actively engage in using up your art supplies and ephemera. You can go through your stash of pattern paper, corresponding inks. You can distress paper for your pages, or tea dye or coffee dye paper. You can pull out other mixed media items like paints and stencils. You can add embellishments like ribbons, fabric, or beads. Here's your opportunity to use up what you've got. If you're using old or found items, now is the time that you can go through your catch-all drawer in your home and pull out all the things that might be interesting to use in a junk journal. Things like photographs, old receipts, movie stubs, things like that. The third thing to love about junk journals speaks directly to what you can do with those found bits. You can practice upcycling creatively. Think of this as a skill that you're practicing. How do you take your materials and found bits and arrange them in a pleasing way? That's the challenge you can take up when you create a junk journal. I will note that this is where a lot of people get stuck. It's really easy to get overwhelmed and to start having doubts. You start to think, I really want my junk journal to look beautiful and perfect, and I know if I start, I'm not going to be any good at this. It's not going to look good. I'm going to hate it. I'm going to be so disappointed with myself. And then you don't do anything. These are real fears, and these are fears that I had when I was starting out with junk journaling. If you have these fears, there are a couple of things to keep in mind. First, what you create is for yourself, and you don't need to share it with anyone else if you don't want to. You don't need to feel self-conscious. Second, when you're done making your junk journal, it's possible you're not gonna like what you have made. Unlikely, but it's still possible that you won't like it. Still, the knowledge that you will have gained from the experience is huge, and it will help you so much when you create your next junk journal. Remember that this creative upcycling is a skill, which means that you'll have to work at it to get better. If you're a little overwhelmed with all the options and components for creating one, then consider my 4th reason for why to love junk journals. You can dress them up as much or as little as you'd like. If you like busy, chunky layers, you can do that. Or you can keep them quite simple. You can think about what you want to highlight. Maybe you want a lot of attention on the cover, but want to keep the pages plain. Remember, you can always go back and add more things over time. This is something I do again and again in several of my junk journals. I wanted to mention something about the concept of time and how we approach working on projects. We tend to have the expectation of working on art in a very precise way. We begin working on something, we work specifically just on that one project in a very organized manner. We finish it and then we move on to something else. The emphasis is on the end product, and you feel accomplished only when you have produced something that is complete. There are two things to consider why this is not the ideal way to approach creating. First of all, the journey is just as important, or sometimes even more important, than the destination. The time that you spend creating is just as or more important than what you create. Second, if you're so focused on completing something, you might close yourself off from returning to it over time. This is something that I get a lot of personal joy from, returning to projects that I have worked on in the past and am coming back to add things, embellish, add new layers, so on and so forth. Next, the fifth reason to love junk journals is you can choose a theme that speaks to you. Themes are good because they help you think about the look and feel of your creation. Some people like to purchase printable kits that include pages and smaller decorative bits. These digital kits are typically inexpensive, ranging from $2 to $4, and you can look for things like spring or Christmas or Harry Potter, Jane Austen, whatever you'd like. I wanted to share this junk journal I made because it's one of my favorites. I called it Carpe Diem, and when I was looking for themes, I wanted to look for and find photos of women who looked confident, of women who looked like they were enjoying life. Vintage photos. And so I went on Flickr, which is a website. It was, I don't know if you remember Flickr from 5 or 10 years ago. It was quite popular in the past. It's just a place where photos are uploaded. And I found some vintage photos, and in addition to that, in addition to the photos, I had a digital download from Ephemera's Vintage Garden. Debbie Ann is the person who creates these digital downloads, and they are my favorite. Everything she creates is really wonderful, and I do, from time to time, use digital downloads in my junk journals. So the photos, this one's really fun. Don't they just look like they're having a great time? So I added a bunch of vintage papers and other things like sheet music or other pages from other books, and put pockets in it, right? I used postcards. This one's really beautiful. And then the covers, I used a book from, it's a Tennyson poetry book, and then stitched in my 3 signatures. Some people preferred not to use digital downloads, digital kits, and would instead focus on finding their own paper sources. You can do themes on family members, people who are important to you. Use things like photos and letters to use as elements in a junk journal. The 6th reason to love junk journals is because you can use them to store paper treasures. So brainstorm with me for a minute what do you think, or what can you consider as paper treasure? You could say photographs are paper treasures, old letters, old postcards. Not too long ago, I did an art exchange using paper currency. If you had a collection of currency, those could be paper treasures. Also, a set of postage stamps. If you have maybe a collection that belonged to a family member, those could be paper treasures. So if you think about what you have and what could be considered paper treasures, you probably will come up with a couple of really good ideas that you could use to embellish a junk journal. Once you find a collection of paper treasures, then you can explore ways that you can tuck them in to journal pages. I'll show you an example. Here's an example of a junk journal that I've used to store some paper treasures. So here I made this cover, and I used, I think this is a Tim Holtz piece that I just glued on top of some heavier cardstock and then painted it. I put in 3 signatures in this one. So this is my little book of treasures. And in here I have little things that will fit inside the pages. I have some currency, and I have some small letters, some pieces of postcards that are cut down, and just odds and ends. I like to also put them in an envelope, and I use these envelopes in the middle of the signature, of each signature, and I use them to hide the embroidery thread that I use to tie off each of these signatures that go in. Let's see if I can find another one. Yeah, here is also another middle envelope. And I guess in the third one I have somewhere else back here. I'll use this one. I also like to make these little pockets. These are great for putting all kinds of flat things. The next reason to love junk journals is one of my favorites. You can turn them into glue books. This is my best suggestion for what to do with a junk journal. We tend to get attached to the journals that we make, and those feelings really grow when you add to the content of those pages in your junk journal. So here's my example of a junk journal that I have turned into a glue book. So I have sewn in my signatures, and when I turn something into a glue book, that means that I am primarily using papers and gluing them in. For this junk journal, most of the papers are a watercolor paper, so they're super thick. So sometimes I did some sewing on these as well. But the majority is paper. This one's got a lot of color. This is not typical of what I do, but I was just experimenting with something different that I hadn't done before. I like that the pages are uneven, so I've got a variety of heights and widths. The last reason to love junk journals is because junk journaling brings people together. Most people who enjoy these types of YouTube videos and tutorials on making junk journals, they are coming from all parts of the world, and we get to communicate with each other through social media. There are really good Facebook groups devoted to junk journaling. There are accounts that people follow on Instagram and then also on YouTube. We are always looking for creative ways to be inspired and to share what we make. and we do that all through social media. Speaking of online artists, Barbara from 49 Dragonflies creates videos about junk journaling. She has a podcast I'm going to be joining her with called Most Requested Junk Journal Questions. Both of us are going to be answering questions that people have about junk journals. If you have a question, do leave it in the comments and we will include it in the list of questions to be answered. So thanks so much for watching, and I will see you next time.